Hello, everyone. I hope that you are doing well. We are definitely approaching the end of class as we have reached our final module. And I know that I've already said this several times, but you guys really have been a wonderful class. Particularly, I've liked the opportunity to meet some of you in person. So thank you for coming by my office or for just stopping me in the hallway. I wish that I could teach this class face to face. I can just imagine what these discussion board posts would look like as face-to-face conversations. So it's good to be able to talk to you. I appreciate the emails. I appreciate you reaching out, and I've enjoyed working with you guys this semester. Before I give you just a brief overview of our last module in the last couple of weeks, I wanted to talk through some of the creative strategies that you guys chose. I would really encourage you to go back and look at these. This is one of my favorite assignments because it's so easy to apply to your classroom. So I wanted to talk through a couple of the ones that I thought maybe you would or would not have heard of, and talk about how they can definitely be used for creative thinking. One kind of disclaimer, really any kind of teaching strategy can be adapted for creative thinking. So if you Google creative teaching strategies, there's a lot of them, right? But you want to be careful because just because you're following the steps doesn't mean you're necessarily promoting creativity. That's why I like to do 1 week where you're really discussing what creativity actually is. We're looking at these different creative thought or thinking skills rather. We're learning about originality and flexibility and fluency and elaboration. And then we're seeing how different strategies in the classroom, some of which you may already be using, can be used to facilitate that creative thinking process. A lot of times when I start working with teachers in terms of creativity, they say, well, I promote creativity because I do these fun creative projects and I let them use a lot of color. And I'm like, well, what is color really doing to their thought process? So it's not about creating a quote creative looking product. It's about what is the process to get there. So for example, an interactive notebook. 2 of you chose to look at that strategy, and I agree. Definitely a creative teaching strategy. But let's think about 2 different ways that it can be used, right? If we're using an interactive notebook, we could have a teacher who's saying, these are the components that you will always have, and ooh, cool, you can color it however you want to. Some of you may have a chart that's blue and yellow. Some of you may have a chart that's yellow and green. And it may look creative, but what is the creative thought process that's going into that? So, for example, what if within your interactive notebook, one of those creative strategies is to use analogies or metaphors? And you could say, actually, I'll use, who said this? I think it was Eliza. Yes, okay. Eliza did her topic on metaphors and analogies. She gave this really great example of having the students, after they learn about parts of a cell, create a story about the parts of the cell and what the different organelles would be if they were running a business. So for example, like the nucleus would probably be the boss, okay? So what if within that interactive notebook, let's go back to that idea, instead of just saying color however you want to, which is how some teachers have used interactive notebooks, you say on this side of the page, you have this list of 10 vocabulary words. I want you to create a story with them, connecting these new vocabulary words to something that you're already familiar with. So you're still using that same tool, you're still using the interactive notebook, but you see the difference between saying, here's some markers, color it, and create a story and connect this new material to something that's previously known. So I just like to give that example because sometimes we see color or we see art and we think creativity, which is really not true. So you want to think about going beyond the product and thinking about the process that got the child there. Now, the way that the 2 of you described interactive notebooks, you did a good job thinking about how could that increase elaboration, how could that definitely increase flexibility, right? So thinking of new ways to present your knowledge. I like interactive notebooks a lot because sometimes they're helpful in creating more of like a long-term project. For example, like they could start on one project or one page rather, and carry that idea into the next page and the next page and the next page. Anytime we have projects that last more than one class period, we're promoting that resistance to closure. We're also promoting elaboration. So I do think interactive notebooks are good. I just like to give that anecdotal evidence that just if we're coloring, that's not what makes it creative. It's the process that makes it creative. A couple of others, Emily talked about post and cluster, which is a great strategy using sticky notes in which the students are clustering similar ideas around or with each other. I like the adaptation that she suggested by having students cycle around and name the different clusters. I actually use this strategy a lot in terms of review for my students. I have them post ideas of different concepts that they've covered, and they have to make various different clusters so they can see all of the different relationships. Post and cluster is really good to scaffold the creative thinking process. So with creative thinking, maybe I have a pen, I can draw this. So some people will describe the creative thinking process as this beautiful drawing right here, right? So you've got, I would probably actually start it the other way. But anyway, we have convergent thinking when we're narrowing down our ideas. And then you've got divergent thinking when you're thinking of a lot of ideas. And then we converge again, and then we diverge again. So a lot of people will think of the creative process as a continual converge, diverge, over and over and over again. The reason I like this concept of these sticky notes is because it's scaffolding that, right? So first, they're in this divergent, think of as many ideas as possible. Then they're convergent, they're trying to group them, they're trying to make sense of their ideas. Then you could have them diverge again. Well, let's think of more examples, and then converge again, okay? Also using sticky notes is really helpful because they can move them around and they can realize there's multiple different relationships going on. I actually use that post and stick strategy for a reflection tool when my students are in the field for the first time. So I like that one. Others that I thought, of course, I don't want to talk about all of them because I can't talk too long. Let's see, a couple of others. We talked about interactive notebooks. Metaphors and analogies are really great. It's great because that is also connecting students to their prior knowledge. So if we think about educational psychology and if you've heard of information processing theory, knowledge is all about building on existing knowledge. So when we ask a student to create a metaphor or an analogy, oftentimes that involves connecting something new with something they're really familiar with. So that's a really effective strategy, not just for creativity, but for learning in general. Brianna talked about Flipgrid, which is a really great video tool. Flipgrid is super easy to use. It's kind of like the teacher education version of Snapchat, if you have that app. The students that I've worked with really enjoy it because instead of posting a written response, I let them just reflect verbally. That can be definitely useful for creativity because it can capture thinking on the spot. So sometimes creativity, especially in like the brainstorming phase, is about not being hard on yourself, about not doubting your ideas. So if we think about Osborne and his theories of creativity and brainstorming, this big proponent of brainstorming is saying anything goes, there's no such thing as a crazy idea. Sometimes when students are writing their responses, it seems more formal. So allowing them to do something like record responses using a tool like Flipgrid is definitely going to help promote some of that confidence to just go with your ideas and not overthink things. Let's see, Christy did a really awesome example of storyboarding. I had a couple of people look into storyboarding, I think. I love storyboarding because, just like Christy said, it generates emotion. So when we think about emotion, one proponent of creativity that's important is empathy, because that's able to connect students to look at things from different perspectives. So looking at things from different perspectives can directly relate to that openness to experience, directly relate to that resistance to premature closure. And when you think about it in a true like creative problem solving situation, the issue is we want them to realize that there's more than one answer. So when you think of like even a job interview, we're looking for individuals who are able to say, well, this is one option, here's another option, here's another option. And in education, we typically don't think like that. So in school, kids are worried about getting the right answer. So by promoting this idea of you have a lot of different ways you can tell this story. You can tell it using your own emotion. You can tell it digitally, which is important for motivation in these days. I think it's a definitely good self-directed tool. Christy did a good job mentioning that gifted children often like self-directed projects. So I do think that would be a good fit for creativity as well. Just a few more. We talked about role playing. Again, that's good for perspective taking. When we get in a rut in terms of creative problem solving, oftentimes it's really helpful to think about the problem from someone else's perspective. The simple idea of that is if I'm ever leading some like creativity warm-up activities, I'll pass something like a pen around and they have to list ideas for what could this pen be used for. And then when people start struggling, I start to put them into different perspectives. And I say, well, if you were an ant, what could this be used for? Oh, well, it'd be something different for an ant. Okay, well then, if you were a giant, what could it be used for? So shifting perspectives is really helpful for creativity. But you can also do that in terms of your content area. So looking at different historical events from two diverse perspectives is very important. Being able to critically analyze a primary document, think about various perspectives that may have gone into that as well. Another effective one is mind mapping. Mind mapping is a great, in my opinion, a formative assessment because it allows the teacher to see how the students are thinking. It's also a great way to promote that convergent and divergent thinking that I just drew because students are able to say, here's one idea, here's all the different concepts that relate to this idea, but wait, that relates to this idea over here, and they start to elaborate on their responses. So mind mapping is great for elaboration and adding all of those details, but at the same time as you're elaborating, you're creating more of a distinct picture and distinct understanding. So I think mind mapping is great. And the last one I wanted to talk about, just in case you hadn't heard of it, was Scamper. So Scamper is pretty popular, at least in the K-12 world. When I was working in Georgia, it was pretty popular. So Scamper stands for substitute, combine, adapt, modify, put to another use, eliminate, and reverse. It is a spectacular tool, usually used for idea generation. So more at the beginning of the creative thinking process, we're trying to think of as many different ideas as possible. So that would be divergent thinking, as many ideas as possible. And it's really helpful in my mind when students are trying to learn a new concept that may be a little bit hard to grasp. So we've been talking about science. I'll just kind of stay on that. If you are teaching about cells and you're teaching about all of the different organelles in the cell, like we talked about with creating the analogy of the organelles. What if I were to ask the students, well, if you had to eliminate one organelle of the cell, what would it be? Well, if you could protect one organelle of the cell from being eliminated, what would you protect? Right? So it helps them see what's most important, what's maybe not as important. Substituting characters into other stories is really good for perspective taking as well, also good for flexibility. So I think that Scamper is fun. A lot of elementary school teachers use it. I haven't seen it as much in like a, I guess, high school setting, which surprises me because I think it's pretty easy to adapt. So I've seen Scamper used like in a high school English class in terms of creative writing. Another example, like the science example I just gave. I actually use Scamper in my classroom, again, with reflection. So we talk about different ways that teaching could have gone differently if that one student was not in the classroom. What would it look like if your trouble student was gone that day? What would it look like if you had a new student join your class that day? How would your teaching have changed? So it's a good way to generate the thought process in terms of creative thinking. So if you have time, go back, review that discussion board, make sure you've looked at everyone's different strategies. I love to give you guys the opportunity to share with one another, so hopefully you find that helpful. Again, I just want to reiterate, just because you're using color or just because your students are gluing or cutting doesn't really mean they're thinking creatively. So you have to get away from this product mindset. There is a product bias in creativity. What is the thought process to lead up to this? It could be a colorful product, but I need to know the thought process behind it. So if your final product is something colorful, but maybe the students had to choose those different colors because they represent different components of what they're learning, there's some creative thinking. But if they're just choosing colors from a box, you're just kind of giving them time to color. So I think it's important to really drill that home because especially with elementary teachers, I have my elementary teachers say, oh, we do so much creativity, we do so much art. And then my high school teachers always say, we don't have time for art, so we don't have time for creativity. So don't just think about the product, also be thinking about the process. So that's creativity. As always, if you want to discuss any of this any further, I would be happy to. Creativity is kind of my bread and butter, so it's one of my favorite topics. Before we go, I wanted just to talk about our last few weeks. So, quick reminder, there is not a final exam for this course, which is good news for you all. So your final project is kind of like the replacement for your final exam. Several of you have already contacted me about what you want to do your final project on, and that is wonderful. If you haven't, you still have time, okay? So let me just give you kind of an overview of what this project looks like. You have the opportunity to research any topic that you would like that is related to gifted education. And after doing all of your research, you synthesize it into a presentation for your fellow classmates. Usually students will do a PowerPoint. If you want to do something different, totally fine. If you're not sure if it will work, then just run it by me and I can let you know. So this is all on Blackboard, but I want to reiterate the components of the project that I'm looking for. The first is a description of your topic. Okay, not just the dictionary definition, not a one-sentence description. I need to really know what is this topic you are exploring. Not just in general, but within the specific realm of gifted education, what is this topic that you are exploring? After you describe, I want to know, why did you choose this topic in the first place? Is there a personal reason? Do you have a student that maybe is twice exceptional, so you wanted to look into that further? Were you in gifted education and maybe you were unsatisfied and so you chose a topic related to that dissatisfaction? Just tell me why you're interested. Then tell me in more detail, how is this topic related to gifted education? What are some potential trends in gifted education related to this topic? What is the research saying? Is this a topic that's discussed about a lot in gifted ed, or is it something that's kind of just now becoming an area of potential concern? So after you describe, tell me why you chose the topic, give me some more information about your topic's relationship to gifted education. I'd like for you to focus on giving these practical suggestions about how that topic applies to the classroom. So the purpose of this course is all about practicality. So if your project is on twice exceptional students, then I want a good description of these students. I want to know why you care about them, why they're important in terms of gifted education. But what I really want to see is how can you practically serve them in your classroom? What are some practical steps that you can take as the teacher and then potentially suggest to your administrator? What are some actual things tomorrow that you could do to help that particular student? In addition to giving suggestions, provide some of the top researchers that are related to your content. So if you're looking into creativity, which would be kind of a broad topic, but you could do it. Maybe something more like creativity in math would be more effective. But if you look into creativity, you should probably be listing people like Paul Torrance or Mark Runco, like we discussed. So providing a list of the top researchers, some of the major work that they have done, and then providing at least 3 resources for your fellow classmates to explore. I ask that you don't just give 3 articles, because think about the way that I've set up our course. I've given you articles, I've given you videos, some handouts. So think about actual resources that you would want to see in the learning modules. A short video perhaps, an easy to read article, and then maybe 1 scholarly article. And then of course, as always, giving your final list of APA citations. One clarification, there should be a difference between your further resources and your citations. So you should have several citations for this project because it's a lot of information. Further resources are the 3 top citations that you think would be most beneficial to your fellow classmates. Okay, so that is the full project. You have some time to do it. This week we have Thanksgiving, so the only requirement for this week is for you to tell me which topic you want to do for this project. So there is a discussion board up on Blackboard, and by November 20th, I want to see you tell me what is your topic going to be, and hopefully I can give you some feedback if needed. Then your presentation is due November 30th, which is a Friday. And then by that Sunday, December 2nd, I'd like to see you respond to at least 2 of your classmates and really take time to go through their work and look at their further resources. And finally, we will have one final discussion post, which I'll talk about more. It's very brief, also due on December 2nd. Okay, so for this week, all I need to know is what is your topic. There is no limit to how many students can do the same topic here. I just like to know that you have a direction going into the break. Okay, so if there's anything else I can do, please do not hesitate to let me know. And otherwise, I hope that you are all doing well. Thank you.